Okay, so today we are talking about unit rates. Okay, a rate is almost like a ratio. It's a little different. A rate is a ratio that compares quantities measured in different units. Okay, quantities, it sounds kind of like a weird word, but quantities pretty much just means numbers. So it's like a ratio that compares different numbers that are measured in different units, and we're going to go over some examples about what these different units are. Okay? So, for example, a ratio, or one rate that we have that we could talk about is rate of production. Okay, production means that you are making something, okay? So people who work in factories, or when you're doing something, you're talking about your rate of production. It's when you're making something. So for example, one rate of production we could say is 4 posters in 80 minutes. This is a rate. We're talking about posters compared to minutes. This is how they're different. 4 posters in 80 minutes, and posters and minutes are 2 different units. Another example of a rate is rate of speed. Take a second and think about when you're riding in the car with someone, think about how fast they're going. What do we typically say about how fast they're going? Okay, so for example, we could say when I drive to school, I'm going, 65 miles per hour. Can you hear that rate in there? What 2 units am I using? Okay, you're right. I'm using miles and then hours because I'm going 65 miles per hour. So a rate of speed, let's just say, what about 10 miles? If you're riding a bike or something, let's say that you go 10 miles in 2 hours. What are the 2 units that we're comparing here? You're right, miles and hours. A third rate, we could say maybe a reading rate. This is going to talk about how fast you read. So we can say that maybe you read 5 pages in 7 minutes. Go ahead, underline the 2 different units that you see in this rate. Okay, good. So we're reading 5 pages in 7 minutes. These are the 2 different rates that we are talking about. So, when we talk about rate, there's something else that we also have to talk about, and it's called a unit rate. Unit rate. Okay? So, rate and unit rate, these are our 2 definitions. And unit just means one single. It means one single. Okay? A unit rate is a rate for which one of the quantities, remember quantities is kind of just like a fancy word for number. So a unit rate is a rate for which one of the quantities being compared is 1. Okay? Now, when we talk about unit rates, or when you see a unit rate, you'll see certain words that are used. Okay? So to write unit rates, use words such as, we might see certain words such as per. So up above we saw, well, we didn't see it up above, but for example, I went 65 miles per hour. Okay? 65 miles per hour. That means I'm going 65 miles for every hour. Okay? You might see the word for each. So the same thing, 65 miles for each hour. And then the last you might see is for every, which I just used a second ago. So if I'm going 65 miles per hour, I'm going 65 miles for every hour that I drive.
Good morning, Travel Science Academy students. The time is now 7:35. White team is on duty this week. Everyone have a great Tuesday.
Okay, I'm just going to flip my pages back because I don't have any room. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about how to find unit rates. Okay, so how to find unit rates. We know what unit rates are. We know that one of the quantities will be a 1. And now we want to figure out, well, how do we find that unit rate? So, we have our rate. We're going to write our rate out on one side, and on the opposite side, we'll go ahead and write out our unit rate that we find. So, the first unit rate that we talked about was one of the rates that we talked about was our reading rate. So remember, we said that we could read 5 pages in 7 minutes. Now, this is a rate, but to find a unit rate, we want to figure out how many pages we read per minute. So we want to ask ourselves, well, if we read 5 pages in 7 minutes, how many pages per minute is that? So first we're going to write out our ratio. Remember we talked about a ratio. It can be written as a fraction, and most of the time we'll see it written as a fraction, and that'll just make it easier for us to work on. So let's go ahead and write our rate as a ratio, as a fraction, okay? So I read 5 pages in 7 minutes. So I'm going to draw my fraction bar. We read 5 pages, so we can just go ahead and write 5, and let's include our unit. So 5 pages in 7 minutes. I have my units. That way when I write my other rate, I won't get confused. I know which unit goes with which unit, which quantity goes with which quantity. So I have my other fraction bar on the other side. We're trying to figure out how many pages per minute. So, how many pages per minute? What are we trying to figure out? Well, how many pages? Since pages is on the top, pages has to be on the top on the other side. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a question mark for right now, or we could leave it blank. and it says how many pages per minute. Remember, per means 1, okay? It means 1. We're trying to find the unit rate, which means a single one. So we're trying to figure out how many pages we read in 1 minute. Now, solving this, we want to figure out what the relationship is between one rate and the other rate. Okay? So we look to see, how do we get from this side to this side? Now, if you've noticed, like we said, we kept our quantities the same. We kept our units together. So let's just go ahead and make sure that we mark that. So keep units together. Okay? And now we want to see, what did we do to get from here to here? How do I get from 7 minutes to 1 minute? What did I do? Think about it. Okay, good. We went from 7 to 1 by dividing by 7. I divided by 7 here. And if I do it on the bottom, I have to do the same thing on the top. So I'll divide by 7 on the top. And this will tell me how many pages I can read in 1 minute. Now, remember, when we divide, we'll put our 5 on the inside and our 7 on the outside. Okay? 5 divided by 7. Now, I know that 7 can't go into 5. So what do we have to do? Okay, you're right. We have to make it bigger. So I'm going to make 5 bigger by adding a decimal and a 0. Okay? 7 can go into 50. How many times? 7 times, good, which is 49. Okay, I'll subtract these two. I have to borrow from my 5 because I can't take 9 from 0, so 5 becomes a 4. Borrow my 1, and 10 minus 9 is 1. Okay? I want another decimal place. So what do I have to do? Good, I'm going to add another 0. 7 goes into 10 one time, which is 7. I'm going to subtract, and I get a 3. Okay? We're just going to leave it here for now at 0.71. This means that in 1 minute, he can read 0.71 pages. Pages per minute. And this little line right there means per. So 0.71 pages per minute. So for every minute he reads, he is reading 0.71 pages. Okay? So let's go on to another one. So the next one we talked about miles per hour. Okay, we talked about rate of speed. So for this one, we said that you rode a bike 10 miles in 2 hours. Okay? The question we want to ask, if we are finding the unit rate, we want to know how many miles per hour. That means for every hour, for 1 hour. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and set up our rate. Okay, we're going to set up our rate. We know that we can bike 10 miles in 2 hours. So 10, let's write our units, miles, and I'm just writing a shortcut. MI also means miles. So 10 miles in 2 hours. Now, let's go ahead and write our second rate so that we can find our unit rate. it says we want to figure out how many miles per hour. That means we want to know how many miles we're going in 1 hour. So I can fill in my 1, and let's go ahead and write our unit. Hours goes with hours, so miles will have to go with miles. And we're trying to figure out miles, so you can leave it blank, or if you want, put a question mark, because that's what we're trying to figure out. Notice how our units stayed the same. You have to keep the same units together. Hours went with hours, miles went with miles. And now we figure out, well, how did I get from 2 to 1? What did we do? Good, we divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1 hour. Since I divided by 2 on the top, we have to do the same thing on the, since I divided by 2 on the bottom, we have to do the same thing on the top. So 10 divided by 2 would give us what? Good, it gives us 5. So that means that if he can ride 10 miles in 2 hours, well, then you could ride 5 miles per hour. 5 miles in 1 hour. Okay, and our last unit rate that we talked about was our rate of production. Okay, so we said that you could make 4 posters in 80 minutes. So how many posters could you make per minute? So how many posters per minute, or for every minute? This means if we can make 4 posters in 80 minutes, well, how many could we make in 1 minute? Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our rate. We know we can make 4 posters, and let's write our units, in 80 minutes. 4 posters in 80 minutes. So, how many posters could we make in 1 minute? Remember, posters goes with posters, so I can go ahead and write that over here. Minutes will go with minutes. I'm keeping my units together. And we are trying to figure out how many posters we can make in 1 minute. Okay? We can put a question mark in our blank spot, or we can leave it blank. This one I'll just leave blank. Okay? So now we need to figure out, well, how do I get from 80 to 1? What do we do? Okay, you're right. We have to divide by 80. And since I did it on the bottom, what will I do to the top? Good, the same thing. So 4 divided by 80. Okay? So let's go ahead. Let's put our 4 on the inside. 80 will stay on the outside. Now, can 80 go in a 4? No, it can't. So I have to make it bigger. I'm going to add a decimal and a 0. Okay? How many times does 80 go into 40? Well, 0 times. Okay? It goes in 0 times. I'm going to make my line a little bit longer. It goes in 0 times, so now I need to add another 0 to make this a 400. How many times can 80 go into 400? Now, here's a shortcut. If we cover up these zeros, 8 goes into 45 times. Right? You can pretend it's a smaller number. It makes it easier to divide. So 80 goes into 400. So let's see if we worked it out right. 80 goes into 400 5 times. Okay? Which is, what do we get? Good, it's 400. We subtract, and we get 0. Okay? So how many posters could we make per minute? Good, we could make 0.05, and this is where I'm going to fill in my answer up here, 0.05 posters per minute. Okay? Remember, a unit rate just means that one of the quantities is 1, and a rate is just a comparison of two different quantities where their units are different. So, for example, remember pages and minutes, miles and hours, posters and minutes. We found our unit rate by dividing, and we found where one of our units, our quantities, is 1.